Jacob had blessed Ephraim and Manasseh. And Joseph was put in the place of the firstborn. He received the double portion blessing, and the blessing that was going to go to Reuben went to Joseph, and through Joseph to Ephraim and Manasseh. So they were now in the place of Jacob's firstborn son. And so Jacob called his sons together, and he wanted to bless them before he died. But this is more than a blessing. This is a prophecy for his sons. And not just for his sons, but for their descendants. We see in verse 2, "Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob, listen to Israel your father." Again, we see the name change. And when we see the name change, it is not just because he has an alias. It is communicating something to us. The sons are listening to Jacob, their father, as he, Israel, the father of the nation, tells of the future tribes. Something that is clearly seen as we go on over the next couple weeks. The characteristics of the sons will also be characteristics of the tribes. Who they are is passed on through the future generations. And so Jacob starts with Reuben, the firstborn. "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch." Reuben, the firstborn son, was in a position of power and dignity. He could have been the leader of his brothers, leader of the family. He could have had preeminence. He was in a place that was rightfully his. But then Jacob took what could have been Reuben's, and he then talks about why that wasn't going to happen. "Reuben, this is what you could have been. But instead, you are as unstable as water." We all know what that's like, right? We all know how water is unstable. I mean, if you've ever been to Niagara Falls, you have seen unstable water that is mightily powerful, but unable to control. We've seen recently in North Carolina what happens when there's too much uncontrolled water. It is destructive, and this is Reuben. Unstable water destroys things. Reuben was passionate, but he had no self-control. He slept with his father's concubine wife, Bilhah. He allowed his emotions to control his actions. And because of this, he lost leadership in the family. And we even see through Reuben's life as he tries to gain back some of the authority, some of the leadership in the family, how unstable he was. Remember when he offered to take Benjamin down to Egypt, he told Jacob, "If I don't bring Benjamin back, you can kill my sons." Reuben was unstable. And because Reuben was unstable, because of who he was, what could have been a blessing became a curse. And as we've already recounted, Joseph received the double portion that should have been Reuben's. And we saw last week in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, Judah received the preeminence. And so here you have Reuben, who could have had excellence, could have had dignity, but he forfeited it because he was unstable and he gave into his passions with his father's concubine wife. And we see how this is played out in the tribe of Reuben. The tribe, I have no idea what just happened. The tribe of Reuben, see, I thought it was such a good idea to control this myself, and then it just went ballistic. All right. The tribe of Reuben never produced anybody of significance in Israel. No judge, no prophet, no leader ever came from Reuben. They had a very minor role in the nation. In fact, the only significant people that came from the tribe of Reuben were Dathan and Abiram, which may not sound all that familiar to you. In Numbers 16, they rebelled against Moses in Korah's rebellion. And in judgment, the earth opened up and swallowed them and their families. That's the only significant people. They too gave into their passions, and they didn't listen to logic, and they allowed their emotions to control them. Reuben, as a tribe, settled east of the Jordan River and eventually just faded into obscurity. This is Reuben. Next is Simeon and Levi. And Jacob deals with Simeon and Levi together. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Both are known as passionate, vengeful, fierce, and uncontrollable. These are not the characteristics that you want to have of yourself. They were known for violence. Remember, they attacked Shechem after Dinah was defiled. They killed men, an entire city they killed in their anger. And this was vengeance. This was not something from the Lord. This was not something God told them to do. This is what they took it into their own hands, and they did it themselves. They gave in to their anger, and their swords were used to harm and not to protect. In verse 6, Jacob gives a little bit more insight into what happened at Shechem. They killed all the men. Right, we remember this as we read in Genesis. They killed all the men. They took the livestock with them. But Jacob tells us here that they hamstrung the oxen. This is interesting, and it shows the cruelty that they had. Remember, they were shepherds. So they were not farmers. They did not plow fields. They didn't do those sorts of things. And so they had no use of oxen. So they hamstrung them. What that means is that they cut the tendons of all of the oxen so that they were now suffering and useless. This is just beyond cruel. It caused them to suffer, and it made sure that they could never be used again. The anger of Simeon and Levi was fierce, and their wrath was cruel. They had no grace, and they had no mercy. These are the types of guys that you did not want to come across in a dark alley. These are the kinds of guys that you actually didn't want to come across at all. That's who they were. Jacob even distances himself from them. Essentially, he says that he wants nothing to do with them. These are my sons, and I don't want to be near, I don't want to be a part of them. I don't want to be associated with them. Yes, they would become tribes, but Jacob did not want their attributes to influence the other tribes of Israel. Verse 7, cursed be their anger. When you think of curse, there are a number of things that should come to your mind because it's the same word. It's the same word to the serpent. The serpent was cursed. Cain was cursed. Canaan was cursed. This is a word given to significant events, significant evil that happened. And their anger was cursed. As punishment, they would not have their own territory. Which is interesting, because what is one of the big promises in the Abrahamic covenant is land. And so Jacob here is withholding from his sons one of the very significant promises of God that they would have land. You don't get any of it because I don't want your influence on your brothers. When Canaan was divided up, Simeon was given a piece of territory within Judah. Simeon was completely locked by Judah. And Simeon had a bit of a rocky history. In Numbers 25, they worshiped Baal, and they indulged in activities with Moabite women. Yet, later on, they defeated the Amalekites. So they were generally a weak tribe. They went back and forth, obedience and disobedience, as most of Israel did. But as time went on, they were just basically assumed into the tribe of Judah. So Simeon lost its identity as well. Finally, we get to the tribe of Levi. And this is where we will spend most of our time this morning. Remember the curse. They would not receive land. They were not to receive land. And Levi was scattered throughout the nation of Israel into 40 different cities. But something else happens here. It is a story of massive redemption. So Levi, we heard the curse, we heard what happened, we heard they received no land. But yet there's massive redemption that happens in Levi's story. In Exodus 32, Moses was on Mount Sinai. He received the 10 Commandments. And as he receives the 10 Commandments, God's presence is visible to the entire nation. And Moses walks down and he hears something loud, celebrating. There's a discussion. What is going on? And Joshua said, it sounds like they're worshiping. And they get down the mountain, and Moses sees that the Israelites had built a golden calf. While Moses was on the mountain talking to God, while God's presence was visible to the entire nation, they build a golden calf and they worship it. And so in verse 26, Moses asked to all the tribes, "Who is on the Lord's side? Come to me." And the Levites answered the call, and they went to Moses. In verse 27, it says, Moses said to them, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, put your sword on your side, each of you, and go to and fro from gate to gate throughout the camp. And each of you kill his brother and his companion and his neighbor." And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses. In that day, about 3,000 men of the people fell. The very passion that Levi had, the sense of justice that caused him to unjustly kill the men of Shechem, now God used to judge the people of Israel righteously. God took what was an uncontrollable, fierce wrath and anger and sense of justice, and God used that very same thing for His glory. See, God has given each of us different gifts, convictions, and personalities. And if left to ourselves, these attributes will be used for sinful and selfish purposes. We will use the gifts that God gives us selfishly, idolatrously, but yet when we are redeemed, He will use these very same attributes for His purpose and His glory. And this is what we see in the tribe of Levi. After the Levites judged the adulterous Israelites, Moses told them in Exodus 32:29, "Today you have been ordained for service of the Lord, each one at the cost of his son and of his brother, so that he might bestow a blessing upon you this day." Situation where Levi's passion and sense of justice caused him to take vengeance was now the very same thing that led him to a blessing. Levi was so angry and full of rage that he didn't believe that God could handle Shechem. He didn't believe that God would be just or right, or that he would do it the way that Levi wanted him to. And so this led him to sin. And yet in Exodus, the people of Levi have the same passion. They have the same sense of justice, but here it's redeemed and it is used for God's glory. The men didn't lash out. They waited to hear from God through Moses. We can see this in each one of us, can't we? Again, we all have tendencies. We all have passions. We all have attributes and things that we're known for. And left to our own, we will use them for sinful ways. For ourselves, for how we want to use them. We see this around our nation. We see this in every organization. This is human life. This is sinfulness. We use those very gifts that God has given us for ourselves or for things that are opposed to God. Yet when we become followers of Jesus, something beautiful happens because those attributes don't change. Those tendencies, those characteristics, those passions don't change. But what changes is how we use them and who we use them for. We no longer use them for ourselves. We use them for our Lord. Instead of using them in sinful ways, we use them for God's purposes and His glory. As we think about life and how things go, and we often wonder, how is God going to use us? God, what have you given me? How can you use me? In what ways? And we try to find things. And we often think that it's something we're not good at doing. Like somehow, if I'm going to be used by God, it's got to be something that I don't like to do. Because if I enjoy doing it, then I'm enjoying doing it. We think of serving God often in ways that we don't like. This is why I'm convinced most people pray that they won't become missionaries, because we don't want to live in the jungles of Papua New Guinea. And I don't know why New Guinea is always the place that we pick. But I think there's this fear there of, if God's going to use me, then He's going to make me do something that I don't want to do. We think that we need to find something that we don't enjoy. Or we're drawn to something that we're not naturally good at doing. And yet God has designed each one of us. And He has given us our characteristics, our passions, and our abilities. I promise you that God will never call me to lead worship singing. It will not happen. And I can try, and I can hope, and I can pray that God, unless God does a miraculous event in my life and changes my vocal cords in my ears, apparently, I will not be called to sing. And that's okay. But let's look for something that we're good at doing already. We make things too difficult. God has designed each one of us, and He has given us our characteristics, our passions, and our abilities, and He's given us those so that we can use them for Him, and we can enjoy doing it at the same time. When He redeems us, He enables us to use those things for His glory. And I love how God took this curse that Jacob gave to Levi and He turned it into a blessing. Because he does the same things in our lives. There are things that we have done, whether it's we have done ourselves or to ourselves, or we've done to others, or others have done to us. There's negative consequences. And things are hurtful, and sometimes things are life-changing. It's things that we look at and wonder how anything good could ever come from them. Yet when God redeems, He doesn't simply redeem the individual as if that's not enough. God redeems all of us. Every part is redeemed. I have shared before that I've done a lot of work on my family tree. It's something I love doing. I love to sit there and think about who's gone before me. Like what all had to happen for me to get to this point. Like you have thousands of people who all come together and somehow make me. And there's characteristics that get passed down in all of those. But one of the things I have learned is that my great-great-grandmother was raped by her brother-in-law. And I've thought about this because the pain that it must have caused. I carry her picture around with me as a reminder of this very thing, that God takes horrible events and He uses them for good. I have no idea how this impacted her life. But what I do know is that from that event, my great-grandmother was born. And from her, my grandfather was born. And from him, my mother was born. See, I don't know what she went through. I don't know what she experienced. A horrible, painful event gave Olive a daughter, Dorothy. And I had the privilege of knowing Dorothy, and I have very fond memories of her. But if that painful, horrible event never happened, a lot of people in this world wouldn't be here. Things don't happen by accident. And we don't understand how God works. And my point in sharing this is that we have no idea what will happen or what will come of the things that happen to us. We don't have an idea of what things will happen because of us or through us. But what we do know is that God can and does redeem. And He does this because He is the Redeemer. The inheritance of Levi is a prime example of how He does this. So let us rest in His goodness. Let us rest in His redemption. There is nothing that happens that is ever outside of God's will and His control. He is over all things. And how that all works together, we don't have any idea. If you have somebody who explains to you, here's how God's sovereignty works with human free will, and here's how all that comes together, please go somewhere else. Because God's ways are higher than our ways. As high as the heavens are above the earth. And that's pretty darn far. Like, we're still seeing things that have never been seen before. We don't understand how God works. But what we do know is that He is in control. There is no sin that you have ever committed that is outside of the ability to be forgiven. The only sin that is ever unforgivable is the rejection of Jesus upon your death. That's it, and that's only because it's too late at that point. Every sin is forgivable. You are never too far from God's grace and God's mercy. There is nothing you can do or have done that cannot be used by God for His purpose, for His glory, and to further His kingdom. As you sit here today, know that God has given you many gifts. And He will use those gifts to bless you and use you for His purpose. And the greatest blessing we can be given in this life is to be used by Him. Our greatest blessing is not to be rich. Our greatest blessing is not to be healthy. Our greatest blessing is to be used by God. Notice that in Levi's blessing, the tribe still receives no land. The consequences of the sin are there. It's done. You receive no land. And yet He took this very punishment and He gave them 40 cities for the Levites where they would be dispersed throughout the nation of Israel, and they would be a blessing to all the nation. The consequences were in place. Yet God used those consequences, and He turned them into an amazing blessing. The tribe of Levi was now ordained for service to the Lord. See, what started out as a curse turned out to be a blessing, a gigantic blessing because of the tribe's obedience and zeal for the name of God. See, to be used by God, it requires action on our part. See, no, if we sit around and we wait for God to use us, He won't until we obey, until we walk in obedience and start doing what we are called to do. Again, this is the tribe of Levi. This is what they did. They answered God's call, and this is why they were blessed. So we don't have a faith that says do to be. We don't have a faith that says do this to be loved by God, but we do have a faith that says we are loved by God, and so we need to do. This is the Christian life. We are loved by God. We are forgiven. We are adopted into His family, and therefore we should live accordingly. Let us as individuals and let us as a church live in obedience and watch how God will use us to further His kingdom and bring honor and glory to His name. The goal is never to bring glory to Falls Community Chapel or to yourself. The goal is to bring glory to Jesus Christ. Let us make His name known in this city that so desperately needs Him.